In the last video, I talked heavily about Zelda 1's Overworld, about its openness becoming more open on subsequent playthroughs, about its mix of hard and soft locks used to gate progression, and about its general freedoms and constraints. If you haven't watched that video, go watch it, as it's important to the following discussion. The Overworld is great, but there's also a lifeblood, a secret sauce that fuels the beating heart of Zelda 1. To understand this secret sauce, we can't just rely on its overworld. We must also discuss its dungeons. The original Legend of Zelda began as a labyrinth creator, where players would create and exchange labyrinths for their friends to solve. But through playtesting, the developers came to the consensus that exploring the labyrinths was more fun than actually creating them. This game, codenamed Adventure Title, became exclusively about exploring these subterranean labyrinths, which would have been accessed directly from the title screen. Eventually, the game evolved, and the labyrinths were all connected by a large field, the Overworld. The labyrinths became equated with dungeons, and the game we all know and love was born. Now, I mentioned in the last video how I went into my playthrough of Zelda 1 with a lot of biases and a lot of misconceptions. I had heard a ton about the Overworld and was ready to critique it so heavily that, well, it turned out to be all it was talked up to be, largely open and readily explorable. I was prepared to spend so much time in that Overworld adventuring, and I did that a little, but less than I thought I would. In fact, my biggest surprise in playing through Zelda 1 was just how much presence the dungeons had. This is both literally true in terms of space. The dungeons take up roughly 236 tiles, almost twice as much as the Overworld's 128, and I felt like I was spending so much of my playtime in them, especially the latter dungeons, which are colossal and sometimes confusing. Because of this, to me, Zelda 1's focus is not its overworld, it's its dungeons, and overwhelmingly so. These dungeons are generally much more simplistic than the tightly crafted experiences we would come to be blessed with as the series matured. They are basically a series of combat chambers with very little of what can be called puzzle solving. But what they lack in sophistication, they make up for in claustrophobia. Locked doors and dead ends abound. Every move counts as rooms are brimming with enemies that are downright cruel, and the tension is compounded by the dungeon theme. In many ways, the dungeons are in direct contrast to the openness and sense of freedom provided by the overworld. But there are many lessons to be learned here. Maps can be found to improve navigation. Compasses point to the location of the Triforce. Enemies carry keys to open locked doors. Movable blocks reveal hidden paths, and bombable walls reorient your progression through each dungeon. You defeat a worthy foe, see your health grow by an additional heart, and proudly brandish that Triforce shard, having not only grown stronger, but also having overcome something substantial. Then, you find your way to the next dungeon and get your ass kicked. Let's think about Zelda 1 like this. The objective of the game is to save Princess Zelda, which is only possible by defeating Ganon, which can only be done once all 8 pieces of the Triforce have been recovered. This is the only objective. How this is achieved becomes abundantly clear once you've completed your first dungeon. Now the path is obvious. Find the dungeons, retrieve the Triforce pieces, save Zelda. But something else is abundantly clear. These dungeons will kill you. A lot. It's in your best interest, then, to become stronger. And here is where we can start to slather that bottle of secret sauce all over the flank steak that is Zelda 1. While the focus of Zelda 1 is indeed its dungeons, its magic is not a result of this underworld. Neither is it the result of its overworld. Instead, its greatness lies in how those two things interact and perfectly complement each other.
Those are cute jeans. You're cute jeans.
Let me explain. In the last video, I mentioned this game of telephone. This old man in Dungeon 4 leads you to this woman in the waterfall, who charges you for information, which leads you up to the mountain maze to Dungeon 5. This is not unique to these two dungeons. In fact, Zelda 1 is rife with this type of interplay between the dungeons and Overworld. In Dungeon 3, the old man asks if you've got the sword from the man on top of the waterfall. What? No? The old man in Dungeon 6 hints at Dungeon 7. Dungeon 8 hints at Dungeon 9. This gives you a clue to decipher and a direction to head. The Overworld then feels like a giant circulatory system transporting Link through the arteries of some giant beast to uncover one of its 9 hearts, the dungeons, which, after completion, pump further lifeblood into the Overworld. I'm mixing a lot of metaphors today. But it isn't just that the dungeons point you across the Overworld. Exploring the Overworld directly alleviates your pain in the dungeons. Caves and stairwells reveal bulk rupees or heart containers, or stores with valuable items or the aforementioned information. And that doesn't even factor in the item progression. Freeze enemies, hit them from a distance when you're not at full health. Find a key that opens all doors. There are items that make you desperately stronger, desperately less vulnerable, and more adaptable. Here's what really struck me about the original Legend of Zelda. There is no fluff. It is pure, lean meat, no fat. These arteries are clean and pumping blood throughout the rest of this game so efficiently. Every upgrade, every secret, every bit of information stumbled upon or cleverly decoded matters. Although there is one pretty hilarious exception. Your exploration is always rewarded with something that will immediately make your life easier. And some of you may be saying to yourself, yeah, but this is literally how games work. And sure, this is true, but I can't harp on this enough. Every little thing that is included is there for a specific purpose. It is there to directly service your one goal of beating Ganon and saving Zelda. It is perhaps the most efficient, rewarding game I've ever played. And I don't mean personally rewarding. I mean the rewards it gives you are completely integral to your progression. Every missed secret is a leech bloodletting this efficient machine. Each thing gained is water in the desert, wings on a fall from a great height. Miyamoto describes Zelda 1 as Nintendo's first game that forced players to think about what they should do next. But there is so much in the game that is teaching you how to play it as you make your way through its 2 worlds. The exploration of the dungeons is different than the exploration of the Overworld. How you explore this is different than how you explore this. But they talk to one another in a way I've not come across in a game before. Not this expertly executed, anyway. I'm trying to be fair to this game. I have 30 plus years of video game knowledge locked into my brain. I know you can bomb walls. I know the goal is to find dungeons. Would those things have been as obvious to first-time players? How long would it have taken to figure it out? One answer is that the manual does exist, and it's meant to be used. The other is that you just stumble around, as someone in the comments of my last video said. Maybe your experience is so much different. It's strange to think that's the case with a game that has a lot more structure than people realize, but that's what makes it secret sauce after all. In the next video, we're going to talk about Breath of the Wild and how no game in the franchise has managed to balance the secret sauce quite as well as the original.